Well, and I mean whale as in this is Shamu speaking. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you are new here and you're not subscribed, then I need you to click the subscribe button down below. For today's video, we're going to be talking about everything that is plaguing this Snow White film that is actually coming out in 1 week from now, March 21st, 2025. If you have been comatose for the past couple years, then you don't know about what's going on, but if you have, you've at least heard of Rachel Zegler, the controversy around the dwarves, the controversy around Gal Gadot. We're gonna break that all down for you and figure out how did Disney and this Snow White film manage to piss off almost every single aspect of the political sphere. Somehow, this film has done it all before even being released. All the way back in 2016, Disney announced its plans to make a live adaptation of Snow White. Now, if you're asking yourself, when are we done with these live adaptations? I've asked myself many times, but it turns out, I'm gonna show you a little graph here, that a lot of the Disney adaptations actually outsell the original movie. Now, could just be due to population. Obviously, cost of living has increased throughout the years, but it is marketable for them to be able to recreate those Disney films. But Disney, don't get lazy. We want to see some new princesses, new films being created as well. 5 years after this, in June 2021, Rachel Zegler is announced as Snow White. And as you guys can guess it, there was so much controversy over this. One, primarily because she is of Latin origin, and two, which was a very valid concern that fans had, was that Snow White, the character in the original book, is named after her pale complexion. In the book, the character is depicted with skin as white as snow. Now, of course, Rachel Zegler herself was super giddy about this role. You could see on her X, I have manifested my entire life, I think. For those of you guys who do not know, Rachel Zegler comes from a Broadway background, so for her to break into a huge movie like this was a big deal for her. But fans of Disney and also fans that were very much against these kinds of DEI initiatives had other thoughts. You can see in this article that is titled Snow White, West Side Story's Rachel Zegler to play title role in Disney's live action adaptation of animated classic. People were having a field day in the comments. Enough with the remakes already. Step in the right direction of diversifying the princesses by coloring the princess named after her skin color. Another despicable case of cultural appropriation. Because Snow White's skin color is integral to the story, maybe like her name suggests. Her skin is supposed to be white like snow. It would have been fine for another character, but not Snow White. Now, stripping out just the racial context, I do think that a lot of these Disney fans have a very valid claim in that the character is specifically named for this key characteristic that she has very white skin. I will say, as a fellow Latino, Rachel Zegler is pretty much a white Latino, or she has very fair complexion. So I don't even necessarily know if they casted a white person, like how fair their skin would be in comparison to someone like Rachel Zegler, but let's go with it, okay? I feel like even Disney thought that this was a valid concern that the people had because they ended up changing the backstory of Snow White in the film. This wasn't revealed until 2024 when Rachel Zegler said that the background of Snow White's name will be using a different version of Snow White, in a version in which Snow White actually survives a snowstorm, and then that's where she gets her name. I'm gonna read you an excerpt from Entertainment Weekly. The 2025 live-action version of the tale falls back to another version of Snow White that was told in history, where she survived a snowstorm that occurred when she was a baby, the West Side Story actress told Variety. Zegler explained that the king and queen decided to name her Snow White to remind her of her resilience. One of the core points in our film for any young woman or young person is remembering how strong you actually are. Now, the funny thing about this is that no previous version of this actually exists in history, and this is corroborated by two different accounts that I was able to find. One is this Reddit thread where people who are fans of fairy tales talk about different details regarding the story. So someone actually in one of these Reddit threads asked about this version of Snow White, just genuinely curious to read it. But another Reddit user responds, after all, the earliest surviving version of the tale, predating the Brothers Grimm, has nothing to do with anything of that sort. And the girl's name is literally Blanca, feminine white as a given name in Italian, which itself may suggest that it's a Southern German tale. Part of me is definitely trusting these people who are big fans of fairy tales, just curious to learn about the different versions of fairy tales, saying, hey, actually there is no version that we're aware of, even predating the Brothers Grimm, which, if you guys are not familiar, a lot of the Disney storylines are taken from the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. Now, just to put a nail in the coffin towards the story that there are other historical versions of Snow White where she actually survives a snowstorm, there is this article that is put out by Screen Rant, which is another publication where people who are very familiar with television, movies, talk about these topics, and they mention that there is a TV show that was rated relatively highly called Once Upon a Time that uses this same storyline for Snow White. Screen Rant describes, in one episode of Once Upon a Time, it was revealed that Snow was born during one of the harshest winters in the Enchanted Forest. Her mother, Queen Eva, named her Snow White because of that, but also because she had snow white skin. Once Upon a Time's Snow White still fitted the classic description of the character, but for the live-action remake, this wasn't fitting anymore. So is it above Disney to shift the story of Snow White in their favor to accommodate for the now Latina version of Snow White? It probably is, because they didn't want necessarily for fans to be able to say like, hey, the origin of her name should signify that the character should be white or at least have like very fair skin. I think Disney utilized this story change to say, well, this is not the same Snow White. This is another version of Snow White, which is that she's actually a warrior or a survivor. Now, continuing forward, the lead actress Rachel Zegler was under more and more scrutiny as time progressed. She went on several different interviews during the press tour and talked about the original 1937 version of Snow White and actually criticized that version and also the Disneyland ride. I'm going to show you guys this interview clip from Variety.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937 and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true.
Now, it feels like the original issue of Rachel Zegler being kind of this woke casting seemed to compound on the idea that she also was not a fan of the original version of the movies.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Yeah. Weird. Super weird. So we didn't do that this time.
As she was describing Snow White as this now kind of feminist icon that was going to save herself, even though in the original movie Snow White is a little bit more docile, she's patient, she's motherly, it seemed as though this was kind of getting redone for kind of a woker audience, and people were not in favor of that, just like they weren't in favor of her casting. But like I said, she also managed to piss off a second group, because there were people who were maybe very much excited about the movie Snow White and just wanted to watch the live action adaptation of it. But Rachel Zegler then showed disdain over that original version of Snow White, which kind of killed the fairy tale for a lot of people. It made a movie that seemingly wasn't an issue that was harmful, that was for children, into something that was now getting mixed into some kind of a politicized realm. I'm going to show you another clip where Rachel Zegler is talking about the Disneyland ride and how she was scared of it when she was a young girl.
I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. Like, I'm being so serious. I watched it once and then I went on the ride in Disney World, which was called Snow White's Scary Adventures. Doesn't sound like something a little kid would like. Was terrified of it. Never revisited Snow White again.
Now, it's important to mention that at that time, those clips seemingly didn't matter too much to the public, but around this time, Rachel Zegler also appeared in the new Hunger Games movie. So she was kind of getting a little bit more press, and then these videos resurfaced the following year. So this is why Disney wasn't really able to like nip it in the bud when it was happening, because it didn't really seem like it was an issue. Another big controversy over this film was the Dwarf Controversy. People first started discussing the issue around the dwarves when Peter Dinklage, who is an actor that is known to have dwarfism, first aired some concerns over the movie and also the 7 dwarves that were going to be depicted. Peter Dinklage appears on the WTF podcast and basically describes that it's progressive to have someone like Rachel, which he is in support of, but also on the other side, it's not progressive because the film is about dwarves or little people and depicts them in this manner.
Progressive in one way, and then but you're still making that fucking backward story of 7 dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing, man?
As a response to this, Disney basically says we're going to work with that community and we're going to make sure that, you know, we don't offend people. 1 year after that, in July of 2023, there is a first look at the dwarves as they're depicted, and it turns out that this is a very diverse group of people, and it's so diverse that people also find this comical. I'm gonna read you guys some legitimate headlines from that time. Exclusive: Snow White and the 7 politically correct companions. First pictures of new live action remake of Disney classic show Stand-In Princess walking with a diverse band of merry men and women after Roe overusing dwarf actors. Another headline reads, Snow, Latinx, and the 7 diversity hires. Now, 2 months after this initial controversy, Disney announces that they're going to remake the dwarves and reshoot that with CGI versions of the dwarves. You can look at this newspaper title, take a first look at Disney's live action Snow White and her CGI dwarves. Disney was not gonna catch a break on these dwarves. Honestly, I think that they were damned if they did and they were damned if they did not. If they picked little people to represent the dwarves from the very beginning, people were going to have a field day, especially around this time. You have to consider that when Rachel was being casted 2021, this was in the height of, I feel like the BLM riots. A lot of talk about race was going on during this time. So I think that they were definitely damned if they chose little people to represent the dwarves from that point on. So I think the CGI dwarves was probably like their best bet to just not offend anyone. They're literally not real people, but a lot of actors, and I feel like a lot of people to this day feel as though little people not being casted as dwarves took a lot of opportunity from that group of people who traditionally would not necessarily receive acting roles in Hollywood, unfortunately. Actors like Peter Dinklage do appear in many different types of films, but we don't really see a lot of little people being represented in TV and film that is not part of reality shows. So a lot of people did feel like this was a missed opportunity. Now I have to also talk about the Gal Gadot controversy because for a large part, most of the attention / negativity around this film was focused around Rachel Zegler, everything that she was saying, the way she was acting, hating the original movie. But Gal Gadot recently got attacked by social media because she appeared at the ADL and gave a speech about the October 7 attack. Now, if you guys do not know, Gal Gadot is Israeli, and when I read through her speech, honestly, her speech was very generic and very like peace oriented. Gal Gadot herself has said that she is not really a politically inclined person or doesn't speak too much about politics, but she felt moved to do so because obviously this attack impacted her country / her ethnicity. The other thing that is very much hearsay is that there is this rivalry between Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot due to this Israeli versus Palestine conflict that's going on, because Rachel Zegler has been very outspoken about Palestine and Gal Gadot is an Israeli. And I think that people are almost trying to make an issue between these two. Like I said, Gal Gadot didn't really take a strong stance, even though she just happens to be Israeli. But of course, in every political climate, people tend to pit two different sides against each other. Even these two actresses who worked just fine on this movie. And most recently, Variety announced in March of 2025 that they would significantly scale back the press tour / they would remove majority of press during the premiere. However, the red carpet will not include the dozens of media outlets usually invited by Disney to interview the cast and creatives at its premieres. Instead, coverage will be limited to photographers and house crew. While this sucks for the press around this movie, I totally understand why. Rachel Zegler at this point cannot say something that is not going to end up on social media against her. Gal Gadot also cannot really speak too much because people just by association are going to have a negative opinion on her. And like I said, the movie in its originality, because of the name of Snow White and the casting of the dwarves, also is under so much scrutiny as it is. The movie is scheduled to be released March 21st of 2025, which is 1 year after the original date that it was supposed to be released on. Are you guys gonna check out the movie? I actually want to watch it now because there was so much scrutiny on it. I'm like, I just want to see the final result. What do you guys feel about this movie, about the casting, about all the controversy that surrounded it? Is it destined to fail? I low-key feel like it's actually destined to succeed because of how much it is spoken about. As I say, sometimes good press, bad press, doesn't matter, at least they're talking about you. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!